deserve it. You're such a coward, you can't think. Unfortunate you never made up your mind. Sucks to say you blamed it all on me, 'cause my last words are eating you alive. I know I left you in a cold storm, and the dark is moving into your sight now. Nothing left except your dead heart. You keep throwing on the cold wet ground. Do you really want to break it apart? Do you really want to dry it up now? I ask these questions and you're still not sure. Still can't answer just the one I hope for. What do you think of me? What do you think of me? I asked you to come to my show for fun. I didn't know it, but you were the only one of there for once. So where were you? My expectations are just disappointing news. Trust me, I'm making on. I'll be over you. I know I left you in a cold storm, and the dark is moving into your sight now. Nothing left except your dead heart. You keep going on the cold wet ground. Do you really want to break it apart? Do you really want to dry it up now? I ask these questions and you're still not sure. Still can't answer just the one I hope for. What do you think of me? What do you think of me? What do you think of me? I'm just a ghost, maybe I know, but you never made me feel like I'm anything. Just a ghost, maybe you don't know that now. You're an enemy. I'm just a ghost, well maybe I know, but it feels like I'm begging, taking all of my energy. I'm just a ghost, well maybe you don't know just what you want to be. What do you think of me?
So these guys, as you heard, I mean, because you were hearing it go down, there's no latency between what's running on all these plugins and what we're able to immediately hear back in the monitors. And then I had two separate Q mixes going to them, you know, for their headphones so that they had their own independent blend. And I could have done as many as 4, you know. So if you're recording, you know, an entire band, all you need is a couple of these interfaces and you're good to go, aside from all the peripheral stuff you need to get into the interfaces. The majority of our interfaces are over Thunderbolt connection because you're getting your lowest latency, stablest, you know, most stable connectivity, and really those two things are the big deal with Thunderbolt. You know, so, but there are plenty of people that don't have a Thunderbolt-enabled PC yet because it's relatively new still, and so we still offer the Apollo Twin USB. The difference between solo, duo, and quad literally just means 1, 2, or 4 DSP chips in the interface, and so that's really what's changing the pricing on the interfaces is the DSP itself. So more DSP you have, the more more plugins you can run, and you know, that's really what it's about. It's worth mentioning at this point too that although everything I've shown you up to this point has been on the recording side, the plugins also run in the DAW for mix as well. Yes, sir.
Curious to know the solo
Yeah, so it actually depends on the plugin. So every plugin has a different amount of DSP required. So certain plugins are very DSP intensive, and so you might actually only be able to run 2 per chip. And some are, you can literally run, 70 on a system. So there's actually a U80 instance chart on the website. And I don't have internet set up here, but we could maybe do it a little later and pull it up.
There's a chart available on the website.
Absolutely. That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Basically, when you're talking solo, duo, quad, I can tell you kind of what the user base is for that. So a solo is going to be for somebody that's essentially composing music with soft synths and only needs to track a vocal occasionally, and maybe wants to put, one of our plugins or a couple of our plugins on their mix bus maybe when they go to mix. But they're not doing highly intensive plugin counts per channel in the mix with the U audio stuff. As you go up, Josh has he's got a duo, and he's able to do quite a bit of work with the duo. Now Josh isn't a mixing guy. I mix all his records, so I've got quite a bit of DSP horsepower in my system. But he does track a lot. Everything from guitar, bass, vocals. For those of you that don't know about this particular plugin, if you actually bought the analog version of a Fairchild 660, it would literally run you about $15,000. They haven't made them since the 1960s. There's about 20 tubes and 15 transformers inside of one of these, and they're incredibly difficult to maintain and very difficult. Only the most elite people in the industry own stuff like this. And so UA has modeled it and then made it available to the general recording community for, pennies, literally tenths of pennies compared to what the real unit would cost. So, that's really where some of the strength of this stuff lies. I think you have a question.
Bradley, in my studio, I've got an Apollo Duo,
Mm-hmm.
and I've also got the PCI card with
That's correct.
processors.
Yep.
So, how does it decide which processor it's going to use for what
Right.
plugin?
So in the mix, it's all shared DSP. So it's going to work across channels to allocate that most effectively when you're in the mix. If you're using it on the tracking side, only the DSP that's in the interface itself is able to be used for tracking. And the reason for that is because otherwise we'd have to send that out through another device. And so to get that zero latency, the DSP actually needs to be on board on the interface.
That's why my mic read isn't available.
Um,
I want to add an insert to it, the Pro Tools track. It's only available on the front end. I got it.
Right. Well, and so a little tip, for maximizing DSP usage, especially if you're a user that's just got, a Duo or a smaller system, what I like to do is, console is going to take precedence on your DSP usage. I think you mentioned that you don't really use it that much, but for those that do, console is going to take precedence on the DSP. So if I was to go and want to, say, mix this demo that we just cut here, I would want to just go to New Session and blow all this out. And so what that's going to do is release all those DSP resources. See, now I'm barely metering my DSP, so that if I was to flip back over to Pro Tools and start adding plugins, in here, then, the DSP will be allocated to the DAW at that point. And so that's a mistake that some users make, is they'll leave their plugins in console going, and then they'll kind of say, oh man, well, this thing's not that powerful. Well, that's because console is going to steal all that power unless you clear it out. Yeah, and inside Pro Tools or, Logic or any DAW, you've got well, in Pro Tools now they have commit and freeze, which are two different functions. One's going to actually burn the audio to a new track. The other one's going to temporarily render the audio on the track. So yeah, those are, that's what we're talking about on the DAW side. On the console side, there's really no commit. You just either turn it on or off, literally with this button.
You don't lose your settings.
Don't lose your settings. No, no. And it's also important to mention that, I just blew out all this console session, and we were just recording, and, you might say, well, wait a second, that was, really great settings, and I want to be able to use that for the next song. Well, everything in console is, you can save it just the same as you would like a Pro Tools session or a Logic session. You can save these console sessions. And so I have actually saved Zariah's session here, and I could load that back up, and it's going to get us right back to where we were. So you can build yourself templates for tracking if you have certain types of instruments that you do frequently, or certain vocalists that you work with frequently that have a specific chain that they like. You can save all that stuff. In addition to that, every plugin has presets built into it as well. So, with the LA2A or something here, for example, if I said, oh, I don't really know what to do with this LA2A, but Jeff Giuliano definitely does. So let's go with his lead vocal limiter. So you can
modify and save our own.
You bet. Absolutely. So yeah, then if I said, oh, well, Giuliano, you're crazy. That's too much reduction. I don't want that. And so, then I can just go here and say save, and that's going to allow me to save my own version of working off of his preset. In addition to that, the inserts themselves, we've got 4 insert slots, and if you click on inserts, you actually have entire plugin chains that we've built as presets as well. So, say you've got a vocalist, but, you're new to recording vocals, well, Ross Hogarth is definitely somebody we could rely on to cut a good vocal. So, we might load up his chain there. And so he's using a Pultec EQ and an 1176 LN as his kind of vocal preset for that. And then, of course, that's for the inserts. The unison, you're still going to want to select, maybe a preamp that you like for unison. The 610B, what did I just make it mad about here? Okay, so those are all good. So the 610B is actually the preamp that comes with all the interfaces inclusive. It's not something you have to buy additionally. And so, oh yeah, it is mad about that. So I can, I've got presets there as well. So I could, go find a Vox preset. And it keeps getting, I've got too much stuff running right now, but, because again, my DSP is, is being allocated both between Pro Tools and the console right now. So, anyway, yeah, so there's a lot of things you can do and then save and then recall, so it's really great for that kind of thing. As you step up in wanting to expand the studio, wait for this to catch up. So, a lot of users are going to start with something like the Twin, for a couple ins and outs, and then get into this DSP modeling. But then eventually they may say, oh, well, we need to record some drums, or I'm getting into doing full bands. And so, we've got the rack mount interfaces that essentially have more I/O, and similar DSP. So the least amount of DSP for a rack mount is going to be a Duo 2 chips, because we need at least that much DSP to start running plugins for that many channels. But the more advanced interfaces, the 8P like this one that I'm running, and then the Apollo 16, those are actually going to have quad processors built in so that you could run at least one unison preamp per channel without any trouble. Because the unison preamps are really where the big DSP load is, because that's where the heaviest modeling is going on. Modeling the nuance of, an entire, API vision channel strip is fairly intensive from a DSP standpoint. So, and again, you're going to get, on each one of these, you're going to get some hardware-software interactions. So if that's on channel 4, you just toggle on the front panel, and then, oh, you guys can't see that, sorry. Gotta get out of PowerPoint here. So if we toggle over to channel 4, I'm going to get my front panel gain control, of course, on this, and then other front panel features that are necessary to any preamp, such as phase flip. You can see the phase switch on and off there. Pad, so we got the 20 dB pad. High pass filtering on and off. You see at the bottom left there, that's kicking on or off there. And then phantom power, of course. So all of your most necessary, mic preamp features are going to be right on the front of the interface, or in the case of the Twin, over here on the controls on the Twin. Let's see here, back to this guy. Sorry about the latency with the video. So we've got, 5 different interfaces that are rack mount. The Apollo 8 Duo and Quad are literally identical I/O, with the exception of the DSP processing. So the Apollo 8 is 4 mic line inputs and then 4 dedicated line inputs with 8 outputs. Every rack mount interface is going to have 2 Class A headphone preamps and then 2 DIs. Channels 1 and 2 are automatically switchable DIs. And so I'll show you that in a second when we flip back to console. Basically, when you plug a guitar or bass cable into the front of the interface, it's going to automatically recognize that and switch to DI. So it knows whether there's something inserted on the front panel, which is pretty cool. Then the 8P is 8 actual mic line preamps, which is what we've got here. And then the Apollo 16 is an all-line, no preamp device, and that's made for people that have a bunch of outboard gear or an analog console. And so that's for people to interface at the line level, still use the real-time, zero latency plugins for monitoring and tracking, but they want to use their hardware preamps, like the LA610 here or something like that. Every interface has 2 Thunderbolt ports if it's Thunderbolt. We also offer a FireWire interface, that silver one at the bottom there, for anybody that's still using FireWire on their PC or Mac and hasn't upgraded yet. We haven't left them behind. That particular interface has the option to be upgraded to Thunderbolt. So if somebody had a PC right now that they needed FireWire, but they thought they were going to upgrade in the future, they're able to go ahead and buy a card for that, and then it's compatible with the Mach 2 interfaces over Thunderbolt. So UA is really great about product compatibility and kind of not leaving things behind. They've made it so the silver and the black interfaces can interact with each other as long as everything's over Thunderbolt. So we haven't talked about the DSP accelerators yet, but those are going to come with a certain bundle. That's at the top left, Analog Classics Plus. The Solo and Duo Twins, as you mentioned, are going to be the real-time Analog Classics. So you're going to get 2 different amp models, the raw distortion pedal, the 610B preamp, which I just showed is that tube preamp model, the LA2A Legacy, the 1176 Legacy compressors, Pultec Pro Equalizer Legacy, our Precision Mix Rack, which is basically our own version of a channel strip, and then RealVerb Pro. So you kind of get one of everything you need to do a record. You get one really great preamp, you get a couple of great compressors, you get the Pultec EQ, you've got a couple of amp models that you can get started with, distortion pedal, and then a reverb. So that's that's kind of the entry level point where it's enough to get you started, and then you can expand your studio as money allows. I know when I first got into Universal Audio plugins back in 2011, I was all analog at that time. I had a really big Pro Tools HD system, 40 inputs and outputs, and I had literally $100,000 worth of outboard gear. I had 1176s, I had API stuff. What else did we have in the rack at the time? We had we had some thermionic culture stuff, Shadow Hills. We had all this analog stuff, which was great, you know, but I was going bankrupt trying to pay those notes, like seriously. And so, you know, because as we all know, it's hard to make money in music, and so you've got to be, you know, you've got to be economical with how you approach this stuff if you're going to get into making records. And, you know, so I bought a quad PCIe card for my Mac in 2011. And then, you know, I bought just a handful of plugins to start. You know, it came with some stuff at the time. It was fairly basic. You know, but it was pretty apparent to me right away, and this was long before I worked for the company, by the way, guys. Like, I've only been working for UA for about 6 months. So, you know, I was mixing records and producing records every day, and you know, so I got my hands on their 1176 plugins, and I literally like stood up out of my chair the first time I heard it. I was like, you got to be kidding me, you know, because I was used to some of the TDM plugins back in the day that were, you know, a little bit less than impressive, and when you start really trying to compare them to an analog device, you know. And so, yeah, you know, that really started a big sell-off for me of all that analog stuff. And so over about the next 5 years, I started buying more of the UAD plugins as I could afford them, and I was selling my analog gear in the process. You know, I've kept a few things. You know, I have a handful of stuff that, you know, I still like. You know, I have some actual Neve 1073 preamps, and so I haven't let those go yet, but you know, who knows? The day may come when I need that $5,000 back, and I've got it in the UA platform. So, we'll see. But anyway, yeah, it's really amazing, you know, the modeling technology, and it really changed my whole outlook on things, because I was very anti, you know, digital. You know, I was into consoles, and I was into, you know, the kind of hybrid working theory that was the middle 2000s of making records. You know. Not everybody was in big studios yet, but you know, a lot of people were still spending quite a bit of money on outboard gear. That's not really the case that I see with the younger generation of producers these days. They might have one or two choice pieces of hardware, but really the majority of what they're doing is in the box. And you know, there's people making really amazing records on a rig that's, you know, a twin and a laptop, you know. Anyway, so let's talk a little bit about you know, the other options for, you know, using these UAD plugins. Obviously, the interfaces, the Apollo interfaces, have the DSP built in. That DSP is also available when you go to mix, as we've discussed. You clear out your console, the DSP is available in the DAW for mixing. Well, when you do really big mixes, you know, mixes like some of the stuff that Josh and I work on with the pop records, you know, we get into pretty high channel counts pretty quick, and you know, sometimes even a quad processor is not enough to do 80 channels worth of a mix for me. So we sell these products called the Satellite, and the Satellite is essentially just DSP chips for mixing. And so what I've got sitting up here is, it's called an Octo Satellite, and it is 8 more DSP chips for the system. And so, and this is expandable. You can have up to 6 UAD devices in a system, so you can daisy chain up to 6 devices. 4 of those can be Apollos. So you can have up to 4 Apollos and then up to 6 total devices. So you could have 4 Apollos and 2 satellites. You could have 6 satellites if you wanted. You can mix and match kind of any combination over Thunderbolt that you want. And even over Windows USB, you can have a USB satellite or multiple USB satellites, and then a dedicated USB twin for your I/O. You know, here's the Thunderbolt satellites I was talking about. You can get into that for as little as $699 for a quad core. So you think about a quad core, and you know, this MacBook Pro right here is essentially a quad core, right? So you're essentially adding another 4 chips of horsepower to a system that is the entire computer's running on 4 chips. So you can actually do some pretty good damage to a mix with just 4 chips, you know. Now, for those of you that, you know, really, you know, in the system that I ultimately built, I started with a quad PCIe card when I first got into the UA stuff back in 2011. And then I ended up, in 2012, I bought an Octo off of a friend that was selling one. So I ended up with 12 cores of power because I was, as I started to grow my UA system, I said, I need more. So, so I ultimately ended up with 12 cores of UAD in my Mac tower, and I only had an 8-core processor in the tower. So I was using more horsepower for my UAD than I was for my other native plugins and the DAW itself, and it worked really well for me. I mixed on that rig from 2012 all the way until this year. I just switched to a Thunderbolt platform when I started working for Universal Audio. So 12 cores of processing got me through 5 years of mixing records of all kinds. So it was a really good investment for me, and it allowed me to sell some of that hardware and, pay down some of those insane gear notes that I was paying. So it really kind of saved my butt in that regard. So we also make the UAD, or the satellite for USB 3. Same pricing on that. And then there is a FireWire version as well for people that still have older computers but want to, get into this. Then of course for the towers, for PC and Mac towers, there are the PCIe cards, which is ultimately what I started with. And then when I switched to Thunderbolt, I put the PCIe cards into a Thunderbolt chassis. So I was able to take those cards, put them in a Thunderbolt chassis, and then interface them with this new Thunderbolt system that I have here. So those are cool because they can kind of be used in all kinds of computers or configurations.